like I said, it's called 2 Samuel. Don't let that confuse you. We're talking a lot about King David. That's just because of the way that the scriptures were originally written, and then the books were broken down, and this is how it turned out. Again, you can study that for yourself, but it's called 2 Samuel, but we're going to be talking a lot about King David, okay? So, the recap is, I know the Forbes brought you 1 Samuel. And 1 Samuel wraps up with the Philistines fighting against Israel. And in the battle, Jonathan, Saul's son, which was also David's very close friend, okay, very close friend, they were killed and Saul was injured, okay? Saul wanted his armor bearer to kill him, but he refused. He asked him, please kill me, there's still breath in me. But he refused to do it. And so Saul thrust himself against a sword. And then his armor bearer did the same since Saul was dead. And this all took place on Mount Gilboa. So that's wrapping up 1 Samuel. We get into chapter 1 in 2 Samuel. And it's really, the overall theme is talking about David's rise to power. And in chapter 1, I call it just power trip for that reason. This is just this trip of David rising to power. And we begin in 2 Samuel with a man coming from that battle. Okay, the battle we just read about Saul thrusting himself on a sword. And so a man comes from that battle and he comes to David and David asks him where he came from and he explained where. And then he says that both Saul and Jonathan have died in the battle. And David asked him, how do you know this? Okay, so now we're in verse 6, and it starts as the man explains that he saw Saul leaning on his spear, but that Saul called out to him, telling him that he still had life in him, but to please finish the job, as he did not want to be taken alive. So the man killed him, and he took his crown and bracelet to bring to David. Now, if you guys were really, truly listening to what I already read you or spoke to you about, he was already dead, okay? That whole scenario happened with his armor bearer. So unless this guy was his armor bearer, which he wasn't, okay, the stories aren't lining up. I'm that kind of person where people are talking, I'm like, oh, wait a minute, that's not quite lining up there. I don't know about you guys. But where you pick up something where it's like, this just doesn't add up, that's kind of one of these scenarios. So anyhow, David took hold of his clothes and tore them, and all the men with him did the same. This is verse 11. And they mourned and wept and fasted until evening. So this is really true honor, and we're talking about reverence this month. That is true reverence. Now, if you know this story in any way, shape, or form, Saul was out to kill David. He was very jealous of him, and he wanted him dead. And David just continued to honor him. He had an opportunity to kill him. And he's no, he cut his robe just a little bit, and then he felt really bad about it. I mean, that's true honor in your heart. Somebody out to kill you. We get mad if somebody took our seat at church. You know what I mean? We get mad because who's in my parking spot? I mean, we get, seriously. And this guy's hunting him down, literally, hunting him down with warriors to kill him. And he's total reverence when he died. I mean, come on, be honest. I think some of us would have been yeah, yes, finally, right? You got what you deserved. I mean, seriously, those you holy, 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 holy saints aren't thinking that. But I would be it's about time, right? This guy is off of my person, and I'm happy about that. But he wasn't. He was very grieved by Saul's death. And so the thing that was interesting, though, is that in verse 14 and 15, he questions the young man, okay? So David says, how is it that you were not afraid to lift your hand to destroy the Lord's anointed? Then David summoned one of his servants and said, come here and kill him. And so he did. So see, this guy, I think the reason I think this guy did this was he was hoping to gain some honor with King David. some favor with King David. Like, I brought you the crown and the bracelet, here you go, and now I have a good job, right? No, it wasn't that way. David was like, no, how come you weren't afraid to raise your hand against this guy? He is the Lord's anointed, and so he had him killed. So he condemned himself by his storytelling. So David was serious about honor. He was serious about honor. He also proved by the mourning and the killing of that man that he did not rejoice in Saul's death. So he proved with his actions that he didn't rejoice in that, like I was saying we might have, right? He mourned and went through a grieving process. Now here's the thing, mourning is important. We need to do that. And people who are in denial when something happens, a lot of people get in denial and they don't go through that mourning process, and that's really harmful. But on the flip side of that, there is also a spirit that can cling to us. And it's a spirit of grief, and it can cling to you, and it will try to actually destroy the person who is still alive by keeping them in guilt and keeping them in this place, where they can't move on. And so that needs to be properly dealt with so that you can move on, okay? So if you struggle with that, just really, one, get any help you may need with proper counseling, but also just lean on the Lord for his comfort and his strength and his wisdom. He's the one that carries us through hard times, because we can't do it on our own, amen? So we go into chapter 2, and we're talking about God's anointed. And it's talking about a lot of fighting that is going on. There's a lot of battle going on. And David, Abner was Saul's relative and general. And so once Saul died, he crowned Saul's son. I'm going to call him Ish for short, but it's like Ishbosheth. And so if I say Ish, that's who I'm talking about. But they crowned him king over Israel at this point. Okay, so this set the stage for like this huge civil war, because it's within the same territories, right? Same area. We're talking Judah and Israel. So we got David over Judah and Ishbosheth over this other territory of Israel. And so there's just this massive fighting going on, just continuous fighting that went on and lasted over 2 years. Abner, which was Ish's general, realized that David began to gain the advantage. And so he used some dispute with his master's concubine to get out of Dodge, right? He's like, I'm out of here because this isn't looking good. And so he took off to David's camp. Now, you can't blame these people, honestly. Again, if we're honest with ourselves, they didn't fully trust Abner. Okay, he came from the other side to David's camp. And now they're like, I'm not so sure I fully trust him, okay? David's nephew, which was Joab. I know I'm giving you some history here, but you're going to hear the name Joab. That's actually his nephew. He suspected Abner from the very beginning, and he ended up eventually killing him. So again, I am paraphrasing, or we would be here till midnight, okay? So hopefully you guys are following along. Again, I encourage you to get in here for yourself, okay? David again denied any connection to this death. Okay, he denied the connection. Why is he doing this? Why is he denying the connections? Because one, he didn't have anything to do with it. But two, this brings healing to the people. When they know they've got somebody in charge that's not just randomly killing leaders and God's anointed people, right? Even though Saul was out to kill him, but it shows a level of respect and honor, and that they can trust him because he's after God's heart. So that's kind of the scenario that's happening with King David. David at this point. Okay. We get all the way up to chapter 4, and we have this news finally getting to Saul's son Jonathan. He had a son, and he was 5 years old at this point, and he had a nanny watching over him. And so the news had gotten there, and she heard him, so she picks him up real quick. This is Jonathan's son, okay? So those of you who have children or have nannied, think about some news coming in, and you're like, I just got to get out of here. This is not good. So she picks him up, and she flees, right? She's trying to get him to safety. I can't even imagine this, honestly, because I've nannied, and I have a grandson who might be watching, might be sleeping. Hi, Yuki. But I can't even imagine as a caretaker or a nanny this happening. But she takes him to get him to freedom. She, in her haste and her hurriedness, she ends up dropping him. And he ends up lame from it in both feet. And so, can you even imagine that? I can't even, that just blows my mind. And how I never really hear much more about her. Hopefully she was okay. I don't know. Maybe not, because I didn't mention her anymore. But I know I wouldn't be okay. But anyhow, so here's Jonathan's son crippled. She did it because she was afraid that David was actually going to come and take vengeance on his boy because of the horrible way that Saul treated David. So even she was thinking, like I said, where it's like, Saul treated David like bad, right? He treated him bad. So she was afraid, like, Jonathan's going to move in here and start taking names, right? And that's not what happened at all. But in that fear, she moved, and that's what happened. So here's this boy who has to live with this lame issue. And I just wonder, like, how many of us, and it was something that wasn't even his fault. It wasn't his fault. He had nothing to do with it. He was 5 years old. How many of us are walking around now crippled by something that happened maybe to us that wasn't our fault? We may not be physically, visibly crippled, but I think in our emotions and in the way that we function, the way that we think, the way that we move or don't move might be caused by that. And I just feel like we're missing out. We're really missing out on what God has for us because we're holding on to that instead of saying, wait, what is mine? What does God have for me? And I'm not going to allow this disability, this thing, to keep me back. So you have to ask, is there anything that's crippling me, that is keeping me from what God has for me? Moving on, in chapter 5, David waited on God's timing. I'm going to say that again. David waited on God's timing. Like, he knew from the time he was a boy, right? Now, this shows what kind of man David is. And he says David was a man after God's own heart. Part of that is patience. God doesn't operate in our 24/7 like we do. He's in his own realm, and he asks us to wait on him, and part of that is growth. He just wants to wait. He could do it at any second if he really wanted to, if that's what was best for us, but he knows, because he sees everything, that may not be the best thing for us. It wouldn't have been good for David to actually be operating as king at the age he was anointed for it and declared for it. He wasn't ready to carry that mantle. So be okay with the timing that God has. And trust that. Don't let go of the promise. David never let go of that promise. He knew it was there, right? But he didn't act all, I'm going to be king someday, and all proud. He didn't act that way. He was fighting. He was leading people into battle. He was doing what was at hand in the moment and doing it the best he knew how to do it. He really did. And that's what we need to do. What does God have at hand right now for you? What is he asking you to do? And are you doing it with everything that you have to please God? Are you going, this is where I am, but whatever. I know I'm going to be king someday, so I'm just not. Because you're never going to be prepared to be king. You're never going to be prepared for that backside of the promise if you don't walk the journey to get there. You're just not. And so we have to trust that process and trust his timing. So David trusts that timing. And in chapter 5, verse 2, says, even while Saul was king over us, this is the people saying this. They said, you are the one who led us out to battle and brought us back. The Lord also said, you will shepherd my people Israel, and you will be ruler over Israel. So all the elders of Israel came to the king at Hebron. King David made a covenant with them at Hebron in the Lord's presence, and they anointed David king over Israel. Now, did you guys catch that? It says, because you took care of us when you weren't king. That's what I was just talking about. He was faithful with what was at hand. Had he not done that, you think they would have said, oh, King David, we're so happy to have you. No, they would have went, great. This guy's not going to be any better than Saul. Or maybe they wouldn't have known. I don't know. But I know it says specifically because. And when because is there, it's because you did this. We're doing this. So be faithful. Be faithful with what you have at hand. They were pleased because they knew they finally had a leader that desired to follow God's purposes. He was a man after God's own heart. There is security in that. There's security in that. When you know that a leader that you have in your life is following God and just has a heart for God and the things of God, there's security in that where you can just rest and be like, it'll be okay. Because I know if you're following a wicked, crazy man or woman, that's a different story, right? There's no peace in that. So they had peace knowing that he was after God's own heart. He goes on to capture the fortress of Zion. That's what it was originally known as, and then he renamed it City of David. So that's where City of David comes in, okay? So he captured that territory, and it was then called City of David. There was another king who sent messengers and building supplies to him. I'm always like, wise man, right? Like, you see this guy taking all this territory, winning battles to do so. I mean, we're talking, it's just different than it is now, right? I mean, they're like swords and stuff, right? They're like from me to you. It's not like, I'm going to push a button and let's see what happens. You know, it's like hands-on fighting. And he's going in and he is doing this. And so this other king is like, let's bless him, send him some building supplies. And David took that as a sign that God confirmed him as king. So he saw that blessing and he knew that was confirmation that he was king of Israel. And the Philistines, now, do you remember the Philistine when David was young, right? Do you guys, Goliath? That was David, that was the same guy. Same guy. So the Philistines, at first they were cool with David, being against them, because they figured he distracted Saul enough that he weakened their army. And so they were kind of cool with him being there. Saul hates him. His focus is to just take his own guy out. So let's just leave him alone, because as long as Saul's paying attention to him, he ain't watching us, right? I mean, seriously, that's what's happening here. And so they left him alone. But now they saw that he's now in control. That's a different story. So they went on the hunt for him. Okay, so that's why that switched there. In verse 19, David inquired of the Lord. He says, should I attack the Philistines? Will you hand them over to me? So David did his 4 minutes to hearing God's voice. Ladies, anybody that read that book? He took the time to actually hear what God had to say. Okay, I'm going to say that again. Man, he took the time to actually hear what God had to say. That's kind of important, and I don't think we do that. We like check a box, like I said my prayers and I read my psalm and I read my proverb. What's today? The 26th. So Proverb 26. And none of that is bad. You need to do that. I am not mocking any of that. But what I'm saying is don't just do it to check a box. Don't just do it to check a box. Stop to hear what God has to say. We do a whole lot of talking. We don't do a whole lot of listening. David's like, should I do this? Like Goliath was big, and now I got a whole bunch of them after me. Like, should I take them? Are you going to be with me? Because I can't do this on my own. God answers him and says, yes, I will certainly hand the Philistines over to you. He says, I will hand them over to you. So he went on and literally smashed them, right? And the Philistines retreated, but they eventually came again. And so David, he could have got a little bit proud. Took him once, I could do it again. He stops again. Says, Lord, should I do this? You're going to be with me. And it was really cool that he asked, because God's like, yes, I will be with you, but he gave him a different strategy. Sometimes we can get so routine. I'm going to take out this devil because I know I've done it once, I've done it again. And we don't even ask God, what am I up against? What spirits am I dealing with, God? How should I approach this? And then we wonder why we're getting our tail handed to us half of the time. Okay? We need to inquire of God, because God gave him a different strategy, which was coming up from behind. And then, anyway, he ended up winning again, of course, because God said, I'll be with you. Here's the strategy, do it. David was obedient and did it. So David did as God had told him, and they were defeated, and then ended up under David's control. Very cool, right? He knew that God established him to be king over Israel, and that he exalted him for his people's sake. So that's what's really cool about David too. That's a person after God's heart. It's like, you're not just exalting me because you like me, you love me, you think I'm cool. It's for a bigger purpose, and that's what we all have to understand. What assignment God has given you, sometimes it feels so internal and so just you, and it's not. It is about you, but it's not just about you. It's not just about you. The choices that you make and the prayers that you pray and the things that you do for God is so much bigger. Half the time, my husband and I will say, it's like, you know what? Most of the time, we're not even going to see the fruit of what God is doing in our lives. We just have to trust and know that it's there if we're walking in obedience. You have to trust that. We're such a microwave society. It's I want it in anybody else? Is it just me? You get to the microwave, you push 1 minute and you get impatient? Yeah, anybody? Just, okay, there's a couple. Seriously, I'd be gosh, why is 1 minute taking so long? We just want things right away. And sometimes we'll never see that fruit. We'll never see that fruit. It talks about that in Hebrews. It's talking about people of faith. They didn't ever see this fruit, but it's forever. And it's just, they just may not have seen it while they're in their earth suit, right? So we got to be okay with that. We have to trust God. So you have to ask yourself, what is God trying to establish through you? What is he trying to establish through you? Some things that you might think are little, maybe they're big, and maybe you just haven't done them. I've got a few of those. I need to finish up myself. But trust that God is establishing some things through you, okay? In you to go through you. That's the key. God isn't blessing you so you can have a stock house full of whatever, whenever. He does that so he can push things through you. Okay? He gives you wisdom so you can pour it out. He gives you blessings so that you can bless. Okay? It's not just so you can have the latest, greatest, and whatever. It's to bless other people. So be on the lookout for that. Ask him. Ask him as you walk through your day, Lord, who is it today? Who is it? Show me who it is today. He will. You'll be surprised. You pray that prayer every morning. I was really in the habit of doing that for a while. And it's so cool. It's so cool because he'll just some random person and then you're like, okay, I feel like I'm supposed to give this person $20. And it's not always money. I don't want to indicate that, but this particular one was. So I gave this woman who was sitting in a car at a Walmart parking lot $20 because I just felt like God told me to do it. She began to weep, and she was in a car and everything. It wasn't she wasn't holding the sign and stuff that was obvious. She was just sitting in her car. And it blew her mind, and she just went on to say how much she had been praying for something, just to show something that she knew that she existed. You just don't know. So ask God, and he'll show you, and it's fantastic when he uses you like that. So chapter 6, I like to kind of sum this one as Uzzah's, is that how you say his name? Uzzah's terrible, horrible, no good, very bad day. He had a bad day. They were moving the ark of God. Okay, so they're moving the ark of God. They go get it, retrieve it, and they're moving this thing, right? I feel kind of bad in a sense, but we'll cover a little more, and you'll be like, okay, maybe I do and I don't. But they're moving the ark, right? And they're partying, they're celebrating because this is awesome that they've retrieved this, and they're moving it, and they're going to bring it into the city of David. And so they're celebrating, they're dancing, and there's music, and they got oxen, right, that carrying this thing. One of the oxen stumbles, and so the ark wobbles. And so this guy, he reaches out to stabilize it, right? I think that would be just reflex in my mind, kind of. I think you would kind of just do that. Here was the problem, is he did this. Let's see, I want to get to the scripture. So they're celebrating. Verse 7, so he reached out and grabbed the chest of God. Then in verse 7, it says, the Lord's anger burned against Uzzah, and God struck him dead on the spot. Why? For his irreverence. For his irreverence. Now here's the deal. You could be like, yeah, but it was reverence. He was trying to keep it from falling, right? The problem was this thing was kept in his father's house for a long time before. And he got really familiar with it. It was familiar to him. And so when things become familiar to us, they can become common to us. And when things are common, we don't really treat them with reverence, do we? They're just, it's common, whatever. And that's what happened. And that's why God was angry. Because he had lost that reverence. And he become familiar with it. So we must not regard holy as common. We can't regard holy as common, but we must keep awe. We need to keep awe. I think we've lost our awe. Everybody go, awe. Oh, seriously though, like I think, like especially in like our society, what do they call us? Western civilization, is that right? Did something from school actually come back to me? Western civilization. Seriously, I think we're not in awe of holy things. We get inconvenienced by holy things. Don't we? Like that rubs up against my life, and I don't know if I like that part. I mean, if we really treated everything that was godly, like about God, as holy, I think we'd be at a whole different level as a society. So we got to be careful to be sure we're keeping reverence. And like I said, we've been talking about reverence. In a great house, there is reverence. So we need to be reverent. Does that mean be stuffy and be religious and legalistic? Anybody? No, that's different. You can look that stuff up if you want to. That is different than what I'm saying. Be careful with that. Because that's a spirit that will attach itself to you as well and cause some bondage. So that's not what I'm talking about. Keep God in the position of God in your life. Like, if you really, really keep him as God, like how big, okay, how many people are in here? I don't know. Every one of us, and this isn't even a smidgen, not of the world, this isn't even a smidgen of Auburn, Washington. And every one of you, not one fingerprint the same in this room. Not one story the same. And he knows every little single thing you are dealing with and up against. And none of it surprises him. Not one thing. That alone should be enough to keep us in awe of God and keep him on the throne, right? That should be enough. But there's so much more. Like he created all of us. He created the universe. He sent his son to die for us. I mean, there's so much. There's no reason we shouldn't be keeping God on the throne and in awe of who he is. Amen. David, so that all happened, right? And Ezra was like on the spot. David was upset about that. He was upset. And so let's see. Sorry, I just lost my spot. Oh, he was angry about the Lord's outburst, and he was afraid of the Lord at that point. And so the ark was taken to the house of Obed-Edom because David didn't want to take it to his house. Now, like, I get it, but it's like, in that moment, it's like, poor Obed, like, dude, like, right here, you take it. No, you take it. Like, but they end up moving this thing to his house. Now, I think David did that because he was afraid, right? Like, geez, you just barely, that thing starts to fall and you're out of here, right? Obed-Edom's whole household ends up being blessed. Like blessings over his whole household because he's hosting the Ark of the Covenant, right? David hears about this. I'm like, David, like, dude, that's not right. Like, but he hears about it. He's like, oh, I want to get it for myself and for my city, so I'm going to go back and get it, right? So I guess he got over his anger management. He must have went to anger management class or something because he decided at that point, like, I'm not angry anymore. I'm not scared anymore. I'm going to go get this thing for myself. So they go. So we're in verse 12 through 22 is where that is talking about. So again, as they're bringing it back, they're celebrating. Okay, they're happy. Now they're really happy because they know this thing is on its way to the city. David is dancing. He's dancing. Now, some people you'll hear it's like that say that he was dancing naked, but he really wasn't. What he was doing is he was wearing is called a ephod, and what that is that was the clothing. He took off his royal clothing, Okay, he took off his kingly clothing, and now he's wearing like this cloth thing that was designed for the priests and people ministering to wear. And so really, for his reputation, he was naked. He was. And so he's dancing before the Lord, just recklessly having an amazing time worshiping God. And his wife, which was Saul's daughter. Okay, you guys following? Isn't this cool? The Bible's so cool. Like, you got to read it. It's really good. But Saul's daughter, she's watching, and she's upset. She's upset about this. It says that she despised him in her heart. That's like, ugh, that, you know, when you get that, like, ugh, that's something you got to work out in your heart, right? When you feel that, that's what she's feeling. And I think a lot of it may have been because David took her from her father, and that whole deal there. So I think she had some resentment going on. See what unresolved issues can cause you to do? Because what had happened, like David looks at her and is like, he's like, girl, like you ain't seen nothing yet, right? Like you think this is reckless dancing. I will do even more than this, and people will still honor me as king because I am worshiping God. And so he also said like this, he replied, it was before the Lord who, let me remind you, okay, I added that part, but I can see him like, let me remind you of this. He chose me over your father as Prince of Israel. So he's like, hey, if you forgot, just in case you forgot, let me remind you, God chose me over your father. And so either way, in verse 23, it talks about that she never bore any children. So I don't know if that was like God's like deal towards her because of how she behaved, or maybe David's just like, ew, I don't want anything to do with you. I mean, seriously, it doesn't say. Like, it could be either or both. But she didn't bear any children, which was a big deal for a woman. And so, anyhow, are you dancing before the Lord without worrying about your reputation? Or are you holding back, worried about what others are thinking? That's what you have to ask yourself. Well, I'm not answering for you. Only you know. Yes, be open and just worship God. Jeez Louise. Okay, I'm going to cruise on this. So, in chapter 7, so we're talking about he's building houses with covenant. So, in short, David sees that he's like super comfortable, right? He's like hanging out in the palace, like, geez, I'm really comfortable here. And God is in a tent. So he's talking about the ark, right? Is in a tent. So he's saying, I want to build him a house. So he tells the prophet Nathan, and Nathan's like, cool, do it. Do what you think is right. But then God spoke to Nathan that evening. And he told him, like, again, I'm summing this up, so read it. But he's talking about God went in to say how much David had done. He says, I am making you famous to be ranked amongst the great names on earth. I am going to set aside a place for my people Israel and plant them there and not be knocked around anymore. Nor will you be afflicted by evil men anymore. I will give you peace from all of your enemies. God will build you a house. So he's like, you want to build me a house? I'm going to build you a house. He says, I will raise up your child and will establish his rule, and he'll build a house to honor me, and I will establish his rule permanently. So Nathan delivered that word to King David. And he sat before the Lord, and he's like, who am I that you have done this for me? Because he's basically saying, like, your kingdom will reign forever, is what he's saying by all of that. He says, you have done all of this in verse 18 through 21. It says, you have done all of this not because of who I am, but because of who you are, out of your very heart. But you let me in on it. Like, how cool is that, right? When God just lets you in on something he's doing. There's nothing greater than that. So he says, this is what makes you so great, God. There is none like you, no God like you, nothing to compare. So David goes on through all of that, and he starts, it's like he's kicking and he's taking names, right? He's seriously like taking nations and bringing them in. And so this goes on, and God says that in verse 6, he says, the Lord preserved and gave victory to David wherever he went. And then in verse 14, it says the same thing again. So the Lord was with him. The Lord was with him. In chapter 9, it's restoration by covenant. Jonathan and David had an amazing relationship. They were like best friends, like by covenant. Like that meant that it carried on into their offspring. I don't know if anyone has friends like that, but that's what that meant. And so he wanted to see if there was anyone left in the house of Saul to whom he could show kindness for Jonathan's sake, because he loved Jonathan. So he wanted to see, is anybody there? And a servant told him, remember little Jonathan's son? Like his little feet were, told him about him. And he says, he told his son that he was going to restore to him all the land that Saul, which was his grandfather. This is like a family reunion. No. That is Auntie so-and-so's. No, right? Like it's that kind of thing. But this is Saul's, or Jonathan's son. So Saul's grandson. Okay? And so he's going to restore everything that Saul had. And then he says, and you shall eat at my table all your days, which was the king's table. He had been living in like poverty. He never sought out what was his. I think it was his distorted self-image with the crippling. We talked about that, right? What's that keeping you from? It was keeping him from what was rightly his. And so David restored all that, and for the rest of his life, he sat at the king's table. And so it's kind of like us. We always look at what's wrong with us and disqualify ourselves, when Jesus is saying, no, you sit at my table. You sit at my table. You sit at the table with the king. So don't let your imperfections, don't let your mistakes, don't let guilt or shame or the condemnation from the enemy keep you from sitting at the king's table that is rightfully yours. Amen? So our worth and our value is not in outward things. Okay? It's in our hearts that we know we belong to Christ. Chapter 11 is three's a crowd. Again, I'm going to sum this up for time's sake. David was like strolling outside the palace on the rooftop, and in his line of vision, I'm wondering how, like, just open line of vision, or was he like? But either way, he noticed Bathsheba bathing, and she was like stunning, right? She was like completely stunning. And so he sent a messenger to go get her. She came over there. They hooked up. She ended up pregnant, okay? The problem was she was somebody else's wife. She was Uriah's wife, which was out in battle. Not good, right? So David goes on to try to cover up what he did. How many of us have been there, done that? Instead of coming clean, we try to cover it up. Don't we create a bigger mess? That's what he did. Like, I mean, it was already messy, but now it's like really messy. Like he tried to do it in a way that didn't harm Uriah. Like he told him, like, hang out, like be done with battle, go be with your wife, and like, you know, watch Netflix and have dinner, and you know, and He didn't do it. Uriah's like, no, I'm not going to do that. There's people in battle. They're fighting. They're dying. I'm going to be there. And so he didn't do it. And there was a couple opportunities that David gave him to do that, and he didn't do it. So finally, David's like, fine. Okay, we're going to do this the hard way. He sends a messenger to send him out to battle, to the fiercest part of the fighting, like frontline stuff. And then they said, don't just, like, David's like, we're going to make sure this is cleaned up, right? Sends him to front line, but then he also says, and then leave him there. Like, get him there and then leave him there, because then I know he's going to die. And sure enough, he did. He did. Might have all worked, but David forgot something. Who's always watching? The other folks maybe didn't know what was going on, but God did. So we had a mad dad. Dad was not happy at all. And so in chapter 12, he sent Nathan to David. And he said, he shared a parable. So Nathan's telling David about this stingy man who was basically, long story short, too lazy to get his own lamb for for an offering, because somebody came to visit him, I think is what it was. And he was too lazy to get one of his own, so he took this poor man's lamb and killed it. And so he tells David this story, right? David explodes in anger. He's so mad and says, this man ought to be lynched. He says he must repay for that lamb 4 times over for his crime and his stinginess. Nathan says, you're the man. And that wasn't like the cool, like, you're the man. It wasn't like that. It was like, you're the man, right? Like, you're the one I'm talking about. You're the one God is talking about. So he had told him everything God had said, and recalling all that God had done for him. And he said that your family will be plagued with murder and killing. So in verse 13 and 14, now this is the Message translation. He says, then David confessed to Nathan. He says, I've sinned against God. Nathan's like, you think? No, he didn't say that. But seriously, he's like, I've sinned against God. And he says, yes, but that is not the last word. God forgives your sin. Can I get a hallelujah? God forgives your sin. That's, yes. And we all need to be thankful for that every day. He says, you won't die from it. He said, but because of your blasphemous behavior, the son born to you will die. Ouch, right? There's consequences for our choices. There just is. I know you want me to say there isn't, and you want me to, gosh, everybody wants to say, no, man, there is. There's consequence for a choice. How many have walked out? It was not God doing it. It wasn't your spouse causing it. It was us. We made a bad choice. Now we got to walk it out, right? Anybody with me on that? I've walked out some nasty choices I've made that was just made things miserable, and it was my own fault. It's my own fault. Well, that's what he's basically saying. So David fasted and prayed, and the son died on the 7th day. He comforted his wife, Bathsheba, because he ended up, after Uriah died, she mourned. Then he brought her to be his wife. And then they ended up having another son, which was Solomon. Okay, so God restored, and God was really pleased with Solomon. And so that's a whole nother story. So anyway, they go on to conquer and plunder other territories. So the key here is God forgives us for our sins. Okay, he does, if we have a repentant heart. That's the key, you guys. I feel like the enemy tries to keep us in a place where it's like, oh, God forgives me. He does, but we have to have a repentant heart. We have to come to him and ask him for forgiveness. We need to be humble and recognize that he is Lord, he is King, he is Father, he is God of the universe, and that we need to ask for his forgiveness and have a repentant heart. We can't just take that for granted, okay? So just confess. We need to humbly walk before him, be obedient to him. If we make a mistake, own up to it. Don't try to hide it and be deceived by our own reasoning. We do that. Don't do that. That's what David did. We see the mess he created. Confess to God, repent, which means turn. Turn from your way. Go another direction and ask forgiveness. And then we can worship out of a pure heart. Okay, then we know, like, we've come clean. God loved David. He wasn't angry with him. It was just, like I said, we made a bad choice. There's, unfortunately, a consequence to that. He still loved him. His love didn't change for him. And so, but that repentance is the only thing that will free us from the bondage of our sins. 1 John 1:9 states that we can admit our sins, confess them, and that God is faithful to completely cleanse us of all unrighteousness. Like, how great is that? If we can admit our sins, if we can confess, if we repent, he'll cleanse us of it. Jesus' blood is enough to wash it clean. Wash it clean. Just don't get a hard heart. Don't get a hard heart. That's what's going to keep you from that. Because you're going to be like, oh, I don't need to do that. Yeah, we do. He wants humility. And he wants to say, I messed up, Father. Please forgive me. I need the blood of Jesus. If you don't know Jesus yet, he's there. He's waiting for you with open arms. Just ask him. Say, Jesus, come into my heart. Be with me. I need you as Lord and Savior. Do it right now if you don't know him. Do it online. Do it right now. If you don't know him, say, Jesus, I need you as my Lord and Savior. I've messed up. I don't know what direction to go, and I need your help. I need your help, Lord. I can't do this any longer. He'll be there. He's already waiting for you. He's already waiting for you. Go to him. And God is waiting with open arms because he has unconditional love. He loves to operate in grace. That's our Father. And I know sometimes it can get distorted because hard things had to happen. But we have to trust who he is. Trust his love, his unconditional love, and his grace and mercy in our lives. And that he is just growing you, equipping you, teaching you, making you stronger through those hard times. He doesn't hate you. He wants to make you stronger because he has great things for you. So let's walk in that. Amen? Amen.